These are the richest Malaysian men in America, and their wealth only gets crazier as we move. We're talking a man that turned a Penang scholarship into a $55 billion semiconductor empire. A man that used a Beverly Hills hotel to secretly structure one of the largest financial frauds in U.S. history. And a man that has been 102 years old and still controlling global sugar markets through American agriculture. Let's get into it. Number 8. Jho Low, the shadow financier, who bought Hollywood, bribed politicians, and then vanished. Low Tak Jho Low is the kind of story that reads like fiction until you look at the Department of Justice case files and realize the numbers are worse than anything a screenwriter would pitch. He never ran a publicly listed company. He never founded a technology firm or built a legitimate operating business of any scale. What he did was position himself as an intermediary between a Malaysian sovereign wealth fund called 1MDB and the Western financial system, and in the process siphoned over $4.5 billion in what the US DOJ has formally designated the largest kleptocracy case in its history. The American chapter of that operation is built on something genuinely clever and genuinely disturbing: cultural arbitrage. Low's strategy in the US wasn't primarily about buying buildings, though he bought plenty of those too, including the L'Ermitage Beverly Hills Hotel and multiple luxury penthouses in New York. His real move was purchasing social legitimacy through the entertainment industry, specifically through relationships with prominent figures in Black American music and culture. He funneled tens of millions into celebrity networks, sponsored concerts featuring Usher, Ludacris, and Busta Rhymes, and cultivated deep personal ties with musicians Swizz Beatz and Alicia Keys. None of this was lifestyle spending. It was a calculated strategy to buy proximity to political access and cultural protection inside the United States. And for several years, it worked well enough to sustain the operation. The most consequential relationship in his American network was Pras Michel, the founding member of the Fugees, who became a key intermediary and was subsequently convicted in federal court for laundering illicit capital into U.S. presidential campaigns and operating as an unregistered foreign agent for the Chinese and Malaysian governments. Low also financed over $100 million in Hollywood productions, including The Wolf of Wall Street, a film explicitly about financial fraud, financed by actual financial fraud, which is either the most audacious irony in cinema history or evidence of extraordinary confidence that the whole thing would never unravel. It unraveled. The US government recovered approximately $900 million through a civil settlement. His $126 million super yacht Equanimity was seized by Indonesian authorities and auctioned. The Beverly Hills Hotel was liquidated. He remains a fugitive, his location officially unknown, and his remaining undocumented assets continue moving through international shadow networks. He opens this list because his operation, in its scale, its sophistication, and its deliberate weaponization of American cultural and political infrastructure, is the sharpest possible illustration of what the Trans-Pacific Capital Corridor looks like when the guardrails are removed entirely. Number 7. Vincent Tan, the 28-year-old who built a fortune from a bank clerk's salary. Vincent Tan's entry point into extraordinary wealth is one of the cleanest examples of franchise timing in Asian business history. He was 28 years old, working his way up from an entry-level bank clerk position, when he secured the master franchise rights to McDonald's in Malaysia in 1980. Before the Golden Arches had any significant Southeast Asian presence, before the region's middle class had fully emerged as a consumer force, and before anyone outside a small group of early movers understood what American fast food franchises would be worth in Asia over the following 4 decades. He knew, or guessed correctly with exceptional precision, and the Berjaya Corporation he built around that bet eventually produced a personal fortune of $940 million. The franchise playbook didn't stop at McDonald's. Tan acquired a dominant 41% stake in 7-Eleven Malaysia, building Berjaya into a conglomerate spanning property, financial services, sports betting through a gaming license that generates consistent cash flow, and mobile telecommunications via U-Mobile. His younger brother Danny Tan of Tropicana Corporation holds a complimentary fortune of $850 million, making the Tan family a quietly significant force in the broader Malaysian corporate landscape. In the United States, Tan deployed capital into the early investment syndicate for Los Angeles FC in Major League Soccer, using sports ownership to embed himself in West Coast venture capital and business networks in exactly the way that other names on this list use philanthropy or real estate, as a social access mechanism that earns returns beyond the financial statement. The Cardiff City chapter is the most colorful footnote in his biography and the most instructive cautionary note. As owner of the Welsh Football Club, he unilaterally changed the team's home colors from blue to red to make the brand more appealing to Asian markets, generating a level of organized fan outrage that eventually forced him to reverse the decision and publicly apologize. The lesson appears to have been absorbed and applied more carefully to his American investments, where he has maintained a lower profile and a more structurally sound approach, deploying sports ownership as a relationship-building vehicle rather than a platform for imposing branding preferences on supporters who have very strong opinions about their kit colors. Number 6. Ruben Gnana-lingam, RICHEST, the port operator, who flipped an MLS franchise at the peak of the market. Ruben Gnana-lingam runs Westports Malaysia, one of the most efficient maritime transshipment hubs along the Strait of Malacca, operating under a government concession agreement that runs until 2054, which is the kind of contractual certainty that makes the cash flow side of his $3.1 billion fortune essentially recession-proof by design. He succeeded his late father, Gnana-lingam, at the helm of Westports, and the operational discipline he inherited and expanded has made the port one of the most consistently profitable logistics operations in Southeast Asian maritime infrastructure. The port business is where the engine runs. The American investment is where the story gets genuinely interesting. He engineered a speculative entry into a Major League Soccer franchise and exited during the most significant valuation appreciation period in the history of American soccer, converting the position into a transaction that valued the club at $700 million, the highest MLS franchise valuation recorded at the time of the deal. The timing was either strategically calibrated or exceptionally lucky, and at that number the distinction matters less than the outcome, which was a massive cash windfall from a market that had spent years being structurally undervalued relative to European soccer, and finally wasn't anymore. The MLS has been one of the more remarkable appreciation stories in American professional sports over the past decade, and Gnana-lingam caught nearly the full run of it. The UK chapter of his portfolio is even more architecturally sophisticated. Following Tony Fernandez's departure as a shareholder in 2023, Gnana-lingam became the controlling shareholder of Queen's Park Rangers with approximately a 60% stake, and then executed a 3-year stadium naming rights deal with Malaysia's External Trade Development Corporation that rebranded the historic Loftus Road as the Matrade Loftus Road Stadium. This is a Malaysian port operator using an English football club as a vehicle for Malaysian state-backed trade promotion and export marketing, fusing private sports ownership with government economic diplomacy in a way that neither a pure investor nor a pure government actor could have pulled off independently. It is a genuinely creative piece of institutional arbitrage, and it demonstrates why sports franchises have become the preferred Western access mechanism for trans-Pacific capital that understands the value of relationships that financial instruments alone cannot build. Number 5. Cheah, the $240 million bet on Harvard that bought more influence than any boardroom seat could. Cheah's $5.3 billion fortune is built on Sunway Group, a construction, property, and healthcare conglomerate that has transformed significant portions of Malaysia's built environment over the past 4 decades. Integrated townships, medical centers, universities, all developed under a model that treats urbanization not just as a commercial opportunity, but as a social infrastructure project. The American story, though, is not about buildings in Malaysia. It is about a specific insight that Cheah had about how influence actually works at the global level, and the $240 million he committed to executing it through the Cheah Foundation. The core of his U.S. strategy is structural philanthropic integration with Harvard University and the United Nations academic ecosystem. By endowing the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development at Sunway University in direct partnership with the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which established its Americas headquarters in New York City, Cheah created an institutional pipeline between a Malaysian private university and the most prestigious academic and policy networks in the Western world. He is a 5-time Forbes Asia Hero of Philanthropy, the first individual in Asia to achieve that recognition 5 times, and the framework he used, modeling his educational endowment structure directly on Harvard's and Cambridge's perpetual endowment models, ensures that his domestic real estate profits are being converted into permanent global intellectual capital rather than depreciating assets. The insight is worth stating plainly. Corporate lobbying buys access for a quarter. Academic philanthropy buys access for a generation. Cheah understood this earlier than most of his peers and invested accordingly, building a level of international legitimacy and elite network access that no amount of traditional business development spend could have manufactured. His Sunway Education Group transfers equity and rights of its educational institutions into the foundation in perpetuity, meaning the endowment grows as the property business grows. The intellectual capital compounds alongside the commercial capital indefinitely, and the Cheah name becomes structurally embedded in institutions that will be operational long after the original real estate assets have changed hands several times over. That is a very specific vision of what lasting influence looks like, and it's being executed with a patience and precision that most corporate strategies never achieve. Number 4. Ananda Krishnan. Structured Malaysia's biggest financial scandal. Ananda Krishnan's $6.5 billion fortune is built on a telecom and media empire through Usaha Tegas, legitimate, substantial, and genuinely one of Malaysia's most significant private business empires, spanning satellite TV operations, energy infrastructure, and commercial real estate across Southeast Asia. His American story, however, is almost entirely defined by his proximity to the 1MDB scandal, and specifically by the role his energy assets played in one of the most controversial transactions the Malaysian state has ever executed. In March 2012, Goldman Sachs, led in Southeast Asia by Tim Leissner and Roger Ng, both of whom later faced serious criminal proceedings, advised the sovereign wealth fund 1MDB on the acquisition of Krishnan's power company, Tanjong Energy Holdings, for $2.2 billion. Former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad publicly condemned the deal, observing that Tanjong's power generation licenses were approaching expiration, meaning the Malaysian state was purchasing depreciating assets at a significant premium. The critical meetings where those capital flows were structured took place at the L'Ermitage Beverly Hills, a luxury Los Angeles hotel that had itself been purchased using diverted 1MDB funds, making the location a kind of architectural footnote to the circularity of the whole arrangement. When 1MDB neared default on a 2 billion ringgit bank loan in early 2015, it was Krishnan who personally stepped in to guarantee and settle the liabilities, delaying the public collapse of the fund and extending the period during which its true condition remained obscured. The motivation behind that intervention, whether loyalty to former Prime Minister Najib Razak, protection of his own position in transactions connected to 1MDB, or something else entirely, is a question that analysts and investigators have been examining for years without arriving at a definitive public conclusion. What is documentable is that Krishnan's Beverly Hills real estate holdings and his deep integration into the networks surrounding 1MDB make his American footprint inseparable from the most consequential financial scandal in Malaysian history. The personal culpability question remains legally and historically contested. The structural proximity to the scandal does not. Number 3. Quek Leng, the $7.5 billion landlord who owns Times Square's front door. Quek Leng strategy for deploying Malaysian banking wealth into the United States is one of the most straightforward on this list, and its very simplicity is probably why it has worked so consistently. Find the most irreplaceable physical real estate in the most durable American cities, buy it, and hold it forever. His $7.5 billion fortune is anchored domestically by Hong Leong Bank, which generates the stable, recurring cash flows that fund the American positions, and internationally by Millennium and Copthorne Hotels, the London-listed subsidiary through which he controls 2 of the most strategically situated hotel properties in the country. The Millennium Broadway in New York City sits directly in Times Square, which processes approximately 50 million visitors annually and represents one of the most economically dense pedestrian environments in the world. The Millennium Biltmore in downtown Los Angeles is a cultural landmark that hosted multiple early Academy Awards ceremonies, with a historic credibility that puts it in a category most new developments can never enter, regardless of budget. Quek doesn't operate these properties primarily as hospitality businesses in the traditional sense. He treats them as real estate land banks, physical ownership of the most valuable pavement in their respective cities, with the hotel operation functioning as the income-generating layer on top of the underlying asset. The logic is more defensible than it might first appear. Southeast Asian currencies fluctuate, domestic political alliances shift, and capital held in Malaysian ringgit has a different risk profile than capital embedded in the physical infrastructure of Manhattan and downtown Los Angeles. Quek is insulating his banking fortune from those risks while simultaneously compounding it through the appreciation of assets that are, by their nature, structurally impossible to replicate. Number 2. Robert Kuok, 102 years old. Billionaire running the global sugar trade. Robert Kuok is 102 years old. He is Malaysia's wealthiest individual, has been for more than 2 consecutive decades, and commands a fortune estimated between $11.4 billion and $13.6 billion that has been built and maintained across a business career spanning 8 decades. Which is a sentence that should stop you for a moment, because 8 decades of active capital allocation is a timeline that makes most investment strategies look like short-term experiments. The American dimension of his empire runs quietly through one of the largest agricultural partnerships in the world, a structural alliance between his Wilmar International and Archer Daniels Midland, which is the American agricultural multinational that stands as Wilmar's second-largest shareholder. That alliance controls transnational logistics chains, including a 300,000-ton-per-year biodiesel refinery in Singapore and distribution networks feeding the North American market, while Pacific Carriers, Kuok's shipping subsidiary, serves as a primary maritime logistics provider for global commodity flows through U.S. ports. The Kuok Group's other holdings include Carey Properties, Shangri-La Hotels, and a shipping and trading infrastructure that touches multiple continents, all managed by a family that has maintained an extraordinary discipline about staying out of the kind of public controversy that would attract regulatory attention. His grandson, Kuok Meng Wei, represents the family's forward pivot, leading investments in artificial intelligence data centers through K2 Strategic, meaning the family that built its initial fortune on British colonial sugar monopolies and once controlled over 10% of the global raw sugar market is now deploying capital into the infrastructure layer of the AI economy. That is a 6-decade arc from commodity monopoly to semiconductor-adjacent infrastructure, managed across 3 generations without the empire losing its structural coherence. The detail about Kuok that goes beyond the balance sheet is his documented ability to maintain genuine personal access to both the Chinese Communist Party leadership and Western multinational boards simultaneously, a geopolitical navigation skill that has allowed his empire to remain functional and expanding across extraordinary regional political volatility. His memoirs describe an early life marked by an abusive father and intense sibling rivalry as formative to the commercial drive that built everything that followed. At 102, still operating, the patriarch of Malaysian capitalism is also, through Wilmar's ADM alliance, structurally embedded in the American food and energy system in a way that most people consuming its outputs have never had reason to notice. Number 1. Hock Tan, the man who took Broadcom from $1.5 billion to $2 trillion and is now on the board of Meta. Hock Tan arrived in the United States from Penang, Malaysia, on a scholarship to MIT. He earned his bachelor's and master's degrees there, followed by an MBA from Harvard Business School, and then built one of the most extraordinary corporate value creation stories in the history of the American technology industry. A story that is still actively being written, given that Broadcom's market capitalization crossed $2 trillion in April 2026, making it only the 6th company in global history to breach that threshold. His net worth is approximately $55 billion, tied closely to his performance-based compensation and equity holdings in Broadcom. His annual compensation package of $161.8 million in 2023 represented an executive-to-median worker pay ratio of 510 to 1, which is either evidence of extraordinary value creation or evidence of how executive compensation works in American technology at scale, depending on your perspective. The company he has built since taking the CEO role has grown its revenues from $1.5 billion in 2009 to $63.9 billion in 2025, a compound annual growth rate of approximately 26.6% sustained across 16 years. Through a relentless strategy of leveraged acquisition and integration that has brought Avago, Symantec's enterprise security division, and VMware into the Broadcom portfolio. The $61 billion acquisition of VMware is the centerpiece of his recent work, converting Broadcom from a semiconductor and networking company into an enterprise private cloud powerhouse and fundamentally repositioning the firm for the AI infrastructure build-out that is defining the current decade in technology investment. His attempted $117 billion hostile takeover of Qualcomm, ultimately blocked by the Trump administration on national security grounds, remains the largest tech acquisition ever attempted, a number so large it briefly made the entire semiconductor industry reconsider what consolidation at scale actually meant. In February 2024, Tan joined the board of directors of Meta Platforms, extending his influence from the hardware and infrastructure layer of American technology into the social media layer, giving him a direct governance role in the company that controls Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp simultaneously. A $28 million donation to MIT's McGovern Institute for Brain Disorder Research is his most visible philanthropic statement, converting a portion of the Broadcom fortune back into the academic institution that gave him the scholarship that started everything. From a Penang scholarship to a $2 trillion company and a Meta board seat, the distance between those 2 points is the entire American technology dream, executed by a Malaysian immigrant with a specific talent for identifying undervalued companies, acquiring them at leveraged prices, and running them with a discipline that has compounded at 26% annually for 16 consecutive years. And with that, we conclude our journey through the 8 richest Malaysian men in America. These men represent 8 different ways of understanding what it means to bring Malaysian capital and ambition into the American economy. Which of these stories impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments, and for more such interesting peeks into global wealth, subscribe to Global Status because we drop videos like this every day.